What's up, everybody? It's week 13. Getting the live stream up. Going to give everybody a couple minutes while I get everything finished up here. But first, we're going to talk about the ACC. Then we're going to talk about the Big 12. Then Big 10. And then the Pac-12. And then the SEC. So I hope everybody had a great holiday, great Thanksgiving break. If you got a couple of days off from work or whatever you did there, visited family and whatnot, I hope it went great for you. Just like the video earlier in the week, still battling being sick, so bear with me. But other than that, excited. So I hope everybody had a lot of football to watch yesterday, had a lot of good games. Of course, it was rivalry week, so that's always good. It's a big deal for a lot of teams. The couple teams we had that were finishing up, becoming bowl eligible, teams that were, making themselves to a better bowl, and also beating their rival. Unfortunately, my alma mater lost last night at Auburn. But anyways, we'll move on from that. At the end of the video, I'm going to actually give out my top 4 that I think should be the top 4, and I hope you guys check that out and let me know. If you have any questions or anything, I'll be glad to answer them. I'm hoping to answer them at the end of the video, just to kind of keep the flow going better. I went back and watched last week. I kind of broke up a couple times trying to keep up, and I really like the feedback, but I'd love to answer it in the comments. For some reason, I can't. If you guys have like the live chat and you pop up during the video, it's not showing up at the end as comments, and I'm not sure if that's just something I don't know about or how to fix that. If anybody does have an idea, please shoot me a, hit me up on Twitter or on this video in the comments or something like that. Let me know how to do that so that I can save all the comments that come in during the video and answer them as we go, if you don't mind. Thank you. So with that said, let's jump right into week 13 of the ACC. So we had 2 games on Friday. We got to see the number 2 team in the country get taken down by Pitt. Pitt did win that game 24-14 over Miami, which was, if you watched that game, they pretty much shut them down the entire game. Let them come back there at the end, score a touchdown late. But, Coach Rick even pulled out his quarterback. I don't know what that'll say to the rest of the team as they move on into the ACC championship game, but that's not a good look. I know you want to make an adjustment. You got to do something because you're losing, but at the same time, I don't know what that does to the rest of his team, what kind of message that sends. But Pitt gets the big win there. They go 5-7 on the year. That's kind of a disappointing year for them. I know they were hoping to go to a bowl game, obviously just like every team, but I don't think they were looking at a 5-7. Miami goes to 10-1. Remember, they had to cancel one of their games from the hurricane earlier in the season, and they will not be making it up. So they will play Clemson in the championship game this week. Virginia Tech gets a shutout win on the road against Virginia, 10-0. Not a lot of exciting news there. I really didn't watch a lot of that game, but I know that their defense came to play. That's a defense that held Virginia to 0. And if you remember last week, Virginia scored a lot of points on Miami. So obviously that's a big win, especially for the Virginia Tech defense. On Saturday, we had a lot of, this week, every year, the SEC and the ACC play a lot of games. In fact, there was 4 total games where the 2 conferences played each other. And that goes back to when South Carolina was in the ACC, Georgia Tech used to be in the SEC, just things like that. Then you got in-state rivalries. Of course, both of those are in-state, but in-state rivalries with Florida State, Florida, and also Kentucky, Louisville. So a lot of ties between those 2 conferences and have been for years. So Clemson takes care of business last night, 34-10 against South Carolina. South Carolina did start out very well. If you've seen any of that game, that South Carolina played a lot of really good defense in the first half, and they just started getting wore down. Late in the second quarter, Clemson put up some points. But before that, it was at the end of the first quarter, it was 7-0, and the 7 points that Clemson had were on an interception return for about 10 yards for touchdown. So really, it was a good game starting off. It just kind of wore down South Carolina. You could really tell a difference in the level of talent that's right now at Clemson versus at South Carolina. So Clemson gets the win. As I said earlier, they'll be playing Miami this week in the ACC championship game. I don't know what the line will be on that. I haven't projected yet to see what my number will be, but I think that's going to be a very good game. And I know, just looking at it from afar, you're looking at a Miami team that has struggled the last 2 weeks. A lot of times, don't forget, that could be obviously overlooking. They're not used to that kind of success. They're still a good team. So, I don't know how they'll come back. It's really a testament to their coaching staff if they can get them refocused and ready for this Clemson game. Georgia takes care of business at Georgia Tech. I think they've won 9 or 10 straight in Atlanta against Georgia Tech. So if you're a Yellow Jackets fan, you're really upset about that. I mean, you haven't beat them at home in a long time. So maybe they can get that going some other time. That's pushing way back in the 90s or early 2000s, for that game. And Florida State comes to Florida. Actually, that game should have been a lot closer than the score finished up 38-22. Florida gave up, I think, a fumble recovery for a touchdown. And I want to say there was some other type of touchdown that just really, wasn't an offensive touchdown for Florida State. So, all in all, that game should have been a lot closer. It was two teams that were 4-6 going into that game. Florida is finished for the year. They're not going to play more games. They're completely done. Florida State, on the other hand, has a chance to go to a bowl game. They play Louisiana Monroe this Saturday. It's a makeup game from way back earlier in the year, and they're 5-6. So they obviously went in that game playing a little harder because they do have a chance to go to a bowl. And if any team in the country right now needs those extra practices, I think it's Florida State. Getting those extra bowl practices will be huge for that team just because they obviously seem to not have had a plan B coming into the season, and I think that's going to be a major motivator for next year's team. You can't rely on one player. You just can't. And there's so many teams, even in big-time Division I college football, that do. And I think this is a testament to you can really see what happens if that number one player goes down. And a lot of teams, it's just from sheer talent that they have to rely on one player. But overall, a team like Florida State that recruits like they do in the hotbed of Florida like they are should never have a problem with, getting a team built to where they don't have to rely on one player. But with that said, also there's been a lot of rumors about Jimbo Fisher. So we'll have to see, all that I just said about the extra practices and things like that may be for naught. If he decides to leave, whether it be to, a lot of people want to say Texas A&M for some reason, and that's a big-time job. If he does decide to leave, then all those practices and things will still benefit the team, but not near as much as, the system and everything that he's got set up. So we'll have to see there. If he decides to stay, I think it will very benefit them, for years to come to get a few more practices. There's a lot that can happen in several weeks of practice for a college football team. That's, that can be seen in spring practice when you got guys that come in for the first time and they get a few weeks of practice in them, and then they come out in the fall and really play hard and play good. So you can really tell a difference in a team in just a few weeks. It's amazing to see. Moving on from that, Louisville and Kentucky. This game was a revenge game for Louisville. Last year, Kentucky came in and at Louisville and was like I want to say they were a 20-point underdog or something like. It was quite a bit. Of course, Louisville had a Heisman candidate at quarterback and Lamar Jackson, and Kentucky beats them. Well, this year it was a revenge factor. Louisville takes care of business, wins 44-17 on the road at Kentucky. Boston College and Syracuse. Boston College improves their record to 7-5 with a 42-14 win over Syracuse. This game was never really close. The score was, but as far as the game, Boston College whipped them all over. I think the closest I seen it was, 14-7, and then it went to 21-7. It just Boston College just kept chipping away and scoring more points, and then the second half just really moved away from them. The next play was one of the leans that I gave out, Duke plus 11. Wake Forest, they were going to Wake Forest. Duke needed the win to become bowl eligible, and they did so. They finished up 31-23, beating Wake Forest on the road. So not only did they cover, they got the outright win. And if I just kept up with this game, I didn't watch a lot of it, but Duke kept hanging in there. They let Wake Forest jump out to an early lead, and they actually just kept staying within 7. And then the second half came. They started chipping it down. They were down by 3, and they just kept playing the game. Ended up getting the win. They'll be going on to a bowl game. That says a lot about Coach Cutcliffe, because the last couple of years, they were at the highest of highs for their system, their university. Last year had a terrible year, and then this year they bounced back and they're going to another bowl game. So that's a great coaching staff at a school that is tough to play, and they continue to have success. And the last game of the ACC was North Carolina State. So North Carolina's been playing a little better the last few weeks. North Carolina State really didn't have a lot to play for here. They finished up 8-4, winning the game yesterday. But at the same time, they were 7-4 going in, bowl eligible, but really didn't have anything to play for. They've been beat a couple times. November wasn't a good month for them, and finished out their season with a 33-21 victory over their rival. So that's the games from yesterday in the ACC. As far as the conference looks, they're going to have 12 teams after this Saturday, when I don't see any reason why Florida State loses to Louisiana Monroe. But if they take care of business, like I think they will, the ACC will have 12 total teams going to bowl games out of their 14. So that's a very good year for them. It shows that a lot of parity in the conference. The conference championship game, Clemson and Miami, will be played this Saturday. Should be a good game. I think that Miami will be a lot more focused than they have been the last couple weeks. Of course, Clemson's got all kind of talent, and so they'll obviously come ready to play. Dabo's a heck of a coach. Obviously, that's an understatement to a national championship coach. But what I mean by that is just he's going to have his team ready, just like always, and looking for another conference championship. So that takes care of the ACC. Moving on to the Big 12. So yesterday we seen a lot of big scores in the Big 12. Friday we had 2 games just like we did in the ACC. We had Baylor TCU. That was a close game for a long time, and then TCU just started running away with it in the second half. TCU takes the win 45-22. They will have an extra day of practice or an extra day of rest, ever how you see it, for next week when they get a rematch with Oklahoma for the Big 12 championship game. So the way this works, if you haven't been, if you haven't heard or anything, the way the Big 12 did it was with their 10 teams, they played a round robin this year, and then the best 2 teams in the conference play again to see who plays for a conference championship. So obviously, a lot riding on that. TCU was ranked 12th going in this game Friday. Baylor had won 1 game coming in. So obviously just a better team against a weaker team. It was as simple as that. The other game on Friday was Texas Tech and Texas. This game, at the time, Texas Tech needed the win to become bowl eligible, so they had a lot more to play for. It is a rivalry game in the fact that it's in Texas. I know that this is not one of those, it's not Texas, Oklahoma, but at the same time, there are some bragging rights out there, and Cliff needed to keep his job. So he did so, and even yesterday, their AD came out and said that he was going to be safe for 1 more year. That in itself can be a situation. I think that the AD at Texas Tech is also the playoff committee chair, and a lot of people may not know that, but that guy's got a lot on his plate. It's been Jeff Long the last few years, and this year Jeff Long got let go from his job at Arkansas. So I think there's a lot that goes on there, a lot of having to spend a lot more time outside of university. And by keeping Coach Kingsbury there, it kind of gives him some stability. He got the win. I guess what I'm saying is the AD needed that win Friday just as bad as Cliff did. It gave him a little room, a little buffer to keep going without having to deal with, firing a coach, finding a new one. At the same time, it's his first year as a chairman of the playoff committee. That could be a lot said for that. Texas goes to 6-6. Both of these teams are 6-6 now. It was a very good game. The line earlier in the week was 10 points. I actually, on the video for the week, if you go back, we actually had a very good conversation with a guy who commented, and I appreciate that, by the way, but he said he was a Texas fan, came out with some good reasons why he thought Texas would come up with a big win. When I projected that game, I had it at 3. I had Texas winning the game, but only by 3 points. So I knew I felt like it was going to be a close game. I didn't dig into it very much until this gentleman come on and was conversating with me about why he thought Texas would win big. And he had good points, and I told him flat out that it could very well go that way. And that I felt like he had all the reason to believe that, but I just thought that Texas Tech would play a closer game, and the line actually did come down to 7 in some places. So obviously some other folks that were laying some pretty substantial money on it thought the same thing I did. Texas Tech came out, had something to play for, and got the win. 3 other games in the Big 12 yesterday. Oklahoma gets a huge win, and by huge I mean put up a lot of points against the West Virginia at home, 59-31. Last week I talked about how Baker come out looked like just a flat out stupid against Kansas with some things he was doing. And sure enough, they took away his captain status for that game yesterday, and also he didn't start. So, he only set out 1 drive. I don't know if that's quite enough. Personally, I think a couple drives, especially since they drove down in 2 plays and scored, I would have kind of set him out a little longer just to kind of make a point. But at the same time, he comes in, fired up, put up a lot of numbers, and they get the 59-31 win. Kansas, Oklahoma State, wasn't a whole lot said here, other than the fact that Vegas knows exactly what they're talking about. That line, I know at least one time I seen it was Oklahoma State minus 41. They won by exactly 41 points. So that sometimes that amazes me, especially on a big spread. Some of the smaller spreads is, that you can kind of see where they come up with if a team is favored by a touchdown or something, and they win by a touchdown. You know what I'm saying. But a big spread like that, sometimes it's amazing to see how accurate they really can be. I remember a couple years ago, Alabama was favored by 51 or 52, and they won the game 52-0. So it's amazing to see sometimes when they set these lines how accurate they actually can set them. And Oklahoma State moves to 9-3 and finishes out their season over a 1-11 Kansas team. And the last game in the Big 12 was a great game. If you got to see any of it yesterday, Iowa State and Kansas State played great. Iowa State was up 19-7 with like 6 minutes left in the fourth. Kansas State goes down, scores a touchdown. Somehow, 3 and out or whatnot, gets the ball back, goes down with 11 seconds to go, had no timeouts. Guy gets a pass to him, he catches it, is about 3 inches from the end zone. The clock's still running. Everybody jumped up, and this says a lot about Bill Snyder and the rest of his staff. Most of the time when something like that happens, everybody's looking around at each other, don't know anything about what to do, instead of just getting on the ball, snapping it, and spiking. Those guys ran straight to the line without hesitation, didn't argue, didn't do anything like that. Snapped the ball, spiked it, turned around and had enough time for, I believe, 2 plays, scored a touchdown, won that game 20-19. So like I said, that's a big deal as far as that shows you a experienced coaching staff that knew they've probably practiced that before. Instead of jumping up arguing about the play call or the where the ball was spotted, if it's a touchdown or not, because it was close. They could have very well ran the timeout just arguing with the ref. they didn't. They took care of business, got the win. Both of those teams finished at 7-5, and that is a great year for Iowa State. Obviously, they've had a big year with a lot of people talking about them, and even though they finished 7-5, which is very good for Iowa State, a lot of times if Matt Campbell decides to stay there, that's going to help him in recruiting. Just since every time you turn on anything with college football this year, especially when they got on their run, people were talking about Iowa State. And that means a lot to these kids that are coming out who, are constantly checking their Twitter and things. And if people are talking about Iowa State, you want to be there. So that's going to help them recruiting, even if it helps them just get one or two extra players or better players than what they would have. That may go a long way. So that finishes up the Big 12. And one thing I will say about the Big 12 before I move on, is they will have 8 teams going to a bowl game this year. So 8 out of their 10 teams will be bowl eligible. The Big 10 is the next conference. And, of course, yesterday we had a big game in Michigan with Ohio State and Michigan playing. Ohio State gets a win 31-20. And in that game, J.T. Barrett did get hurt. So we'll see what happens with that. Supposedly, before the game got started, he got hit by a cameraman. I don't know, it sounds like a crazy story, but things can happen. There's a lot of moving parts at a football game, especially one that big. A lot of people there. A lot of people that probably shouldn't be on the sideline are there, making things cramped. And ended up he tweaked his knee, and then later in the game, he actually tweaked it again on a tackle when he got tackled and had to lead the game. Now, their backup quarterback really impressed me. Can't remember his name at the moment, but he came in, played great, played with no emotion, played like he should have, not like a backup. He came in off the bench, and you could just tell it in his eyes. He was focused. He was ready to go. You could tell he prepared for that game just like everybody else did, and helped that team take the lead and ultimately win the game. So that was impressive to me. I'll keep a watch on him as far as for next season, and see if he is going to be the starter or whatever. I don't know exactly what year he is, but if he stays or whatnot and is the starter, that guy came in ready to play, and he had no clue that he was going to play that day. So that did impress me a little bit. Back on Friday, Iowa took care of business against Nebraska, 56-14. Iowa moved to 7-5, while Nebraska fell to 4-8. I believe that is the first time Nebraska has been 4-8 in a long, long time, if ever. So it did cost Mike Riley his job. Well, the year cost Mike Riley his job, but losing that big on your last game definitely does not help. That is a good guy. Mike Riley is a good person, but a lot of people don't know this, and the only reason I know is because I'm from Alabama, went to Alabama. But back when Saban was getting hired at Alabama, one of the guys that was interviewed was Mike Riley, and he decided to stay at Oregon State and pretty much turned down the University of Alabama. So a lot of people don't know that, and obviously it was meant to be that something else happened. We ultimately got Nick Saban, and as you know, what happened with the rest of that. But Iowa takes care of business, moves to 7-5. They've had an up and down year, and a lot of times with these teams that have an up and down year, I try to keep up with them for the bowl game, because you don't really know what they're going to do. You don't really know how they're going to come out. If they come out like they played against Ohio State, they'll beat whoever they're playing. Doesn't matter who they're playing. If they come out like they played against other teams, if they play like they did against Wisconsin, where the offense couldn't complete a pass, they'll lose to who they're playing. So it's really some teams like that you want to stay away from. You want to, pass. You definitely want to look at the game, break it down, look at your notes on it, but at the same time, you want to pass on a game like that. You don't want to take a team like that. As far as Saturday goes, Wisconsin, pretty cool note here. In that rivalry with Minnesota, Minnesota has led the series all the way up until yesterday. So Wisconsin actually was tied from last year with Minnesota in that rivalry series, and then yesterday took the lead for the first time ever. So that's a pretty cool note, especially in our generation of knowing where Wisconsin has been versus where Minnesota has been. It must have been really dominated way back. So Minnesota moves to 5-7. They did need that game yesterday. They didn't get it. They got shut out 2 weeks in a row. That was the lean that I missed. I felt like even if they didn't get the win, I felt like they'd play a little harder than that. And had them plus 17. And that was the only lean that did miss yesterday. We've already talked about Ohio State and Michigan. Ohio State moves to 10-2. It's a big, they moved to 10-2. They do end up going to the conference championship from that side. Michigan falls to 8-4. Give the coach a lifetime contract or working on one or something like that, and they finish deep in the side of the conference again. So I don't understand it, but more power to them. Penn State and Maryland. This game was really dominated by Penn State from the start. There was never a chance for Maryland in this game. Penn State wins it big, 66-3. I don't know. I mean, Maryland falls to 4-8. There's really not a lot to be said there. Maryland seems to have a lot of trouble at quarterback and has had for the last few years. They've had a year where they went through 5 quarterbacks. I think this year they went through at least 3 or 4 quarterbacks. They just can't seem to keep them healthy. And all that starts on the offensive line, obviously. If you can't block them, you can't keep the guy behind you healthy. Michigan State and Rutgers, this was also dominated. Michigan State moves to 9-3 with a 40-7 victory over Rutgers. Rutgers falls to 4-8. Northwestern, Illinois. So Northwestern takes care of business. Had a very dominant. They couldn't do anything in the first quarter, and then every quarter after that scored multiple touchdowns. So after the first quarter, they kind of got things going and took care of business, winning 42-7. Northwestern moves to 9-3 as quietly as you could possibly be. I don't know how many people have been talking about Northwestern, but I know it would shock a lot of people to know that they're 9-3. That's very good. You know, that's a big year at Northwestern for sure, and it shows that they are a good team. So keep that in mind whenever they do go to the bowl game. They've just been really under the radar all year compared to other teams that are that record or better. And then Indiana and Purdue was a big game yesterday because the winner goes on to a bowl game. Purdue, who I've obviously been high on for a while now, wins 31-24. That game, I believe they were up 31-10 and let Indiana score a couple late touchdowns to make it a lot closer. But Purdue gets a big win at home. That home crowd was packed yesterday, which is a good sign for that university and things to come. Things like that you got to keep up with. Who's behind them? Are they playing? You know, if you project the score and these guys are playing hard and they've been playing hard and they've got the crowd behind them, maybe give them a couple points, you know, because of the sheer fact that they're going to play better than what they actually should be playing. They're going to play a little harder than what they should. I think their average attendance went up like 13,000 people each game this year. That's huge for a school that, you know, has not had a lot to play for since Joe Tiller left. And so with that said, that's all the games from the last couple of days in the Big Ten. As far as the conference goes, they've got 8 teams that will be going to a bowl. 8 out of 14, it seems a little low. So, a lot of times that means that the conference was a little more top-heavy than years past. But you got Ohio State and Wisconsin will be playing for the conference championship game. Ohio State, in my opinion, is a better team. We'll have to see about the J.T. Barrett injury and see what happens there. But at the same time, I say that with knowing that Wisconsin's taking care of business every game. They're undefeated. A lot of people figured they'd be undefeated this year. A lot of, Vegas, I think they set the line at 10.5 games. So for that, they felt like they would be a good team. And they had a what I would think, a weak schedule. But at the same time, you win 12 games, you win 12 games. You even no matter how weak your schedule is, if you don't take care of business, it doesn't matter. And they took care of business. So the games that they played tough opponents, they played above what they should have. In games that they play weak opponents, they probably played down a little bit, but at the same time, they got the win. So keep that in mind. Don't let that fool you in this week when you're looking at the game or even in the bowl game, wherever they go. Let's see what happens there and see how Wisconsin plays against a really good team in Ohio State. So that takes care of the Big Ten. The next conference is the Pac-12. Back on Friday, we had our first play that I gave out, Cal +7. Actually, I think it was +7.5 when I did my video. And they lose by 3 to UCLA. I thought that Cal would actually get the outright win. I didn't think that UCLA would have a lot to play for here other than going to a bowl. Both these teams were 5 and 6 going in that game, needed the win. And UCLA just had fired their head coach. So I felt like Cal had an advantage there, plus their head coach in his first year is a very good defensive coordinator or defensive-minded coach. So I felt like they would come out and play pretty good, and they did. They lost by 3. It got us the cover, but at the same time, I actually thought they would get the outright win there. On Saturday, last night, Stanford took care of business against Notre Dame at home, 38-20. It's a big win for Stanford. That moves them to 9-3. And they will be going to play for the conference championship game because Washington State could not take care of business. Washington State ended up losing 41-14 at Washington yesterday. They had their destiny in their hand. All they had to do was take care of business, win the rivalry game, and they would be Pac-12 North champions. They couldn't do it. They go to 9-3. Washington moves to 10-2. But because Washington, with the losses that they had, that puts Stanford in the conference championship for the North. Talking about that Washington State game, it just, Washington State didn't even score till the fourth quarter. That was really dominated by Washington, went completely opposite of what I thought. That was our one loss for our 3 plays that we gave out. And I just felt like Washington State would come in and at least hold it within the spread. I thought they'd hold it within 7 to 3 points. They didn't. They come out and just kind of laid down. There were several times, including the first drive, where you could just tell it was going to be broke. And what I mean by that is there was 2 or 3 plays on the first drive where Washington ran a play and Wazoo came up, hit them. They'd have a defender on them, and pretty much Washington would drag them another 8 or 9 yards. I mean, you could just tell, you can see the will in the players when something like that happens, and you knew it was going to go Washington's way. So, and the good thing is that nowadays you can actually bet live. So if you see something like that, you see that players are playing way harder on one side, it's worth the shot at looking at the live line. I don't do much of that just because I'm trying to watch so many games at one time. But at the same time, if you do or are interested in live lines, there's a lot of value there. So check that out, in the future. Arizona and Arizona State was the 3rd game that we gave out as official play. Arizona State we had in a pick'em, and if you waited till later in the week, actually right before game time, Arizona was favored by 2.5 points. So you had them right under a field goal, but you'd been getting points at home. Arizona State did go down. At first, they were down 24-14, and I believe that was right before halftime. And all of a sudden, or at halftime, it was 24-14. In the second half, Arizona State took care of business. They come out, scored 21 in the 3rd quarter, and ultimately got that win 42-30 at home, which improved both these teams ended up 7-5 on the year, which is a lot better than I thought they would do. I thought Arizona State and Arizona would be a lot, closer to the bottom. Ended up Arizona State is 2nd in the Pac-12 South to USC. Oregon State and Oregon, this was a one-sided game. Justin Herbert being back for Oregon is huge. These guys are just playing on a whole nother level. They've got out talent, better talent than what Oregon State does, and Oregon State's having a bad year. It was simply bad against good. And 69-10 win there for Oregon shows that them having a quarterback back They're very stout and very good. So just keep that in mind going into bowl season. Colorado and Utah, both these teams need a win to get to a bowl game. Utah takes care of business at home, had a big first half, scoring 28 points, and ultimately got the win 34-13 against Colorado. It was a good game there for a little while as far as defense. A few things went Utah's way and gave them touchdowns, and they just took care of business at home. So Colorado, coming off a 9-3 year last year, finishes at 5-7, and that I talked about last week. I really think a big part of that was losing their defensive coordinator who went to Oregon. I think that guy Jim Leavitt is going to be something else. He has been. He knows what he's talking about. He was at South Florida as a head coach back in 06, 07. I think he actually helped start that program at South Florida, and this guy just knows, like I said, he knows what he's talking about. He's a good coach. He got a little too emotional, ended up hitting a player in the locker room, actually punching him, I think. That cost him lose his job. I think he took a couple years off. Comes back and is dominant on defense. So they're just going to continue to get better and better. They're going to continue to focus on his system, and if he stays there and is at Oregon next year, I think they're a legit team to look at. If they can get their offense going kind of like they have with Justin Herbert this year, I think Oregon's going to be very good next year. That sums up all the games from yesterday in the Pac-12. As far as your Pac-12 championship game, you're going to have Stanford by default, and you're going to have USC. Now, remember that USC did not play yesterday. They had a week off, so they've had 2 weeks. Next Saturday they will have had 2 weeks to get ready for that Pac-12 championship game. So keep that in mind. They've been watching film. I'm sure they watched it on both Washington State and Stanford this week to try to get prepared for both. And now they'll focus on Stanford, and they'll be ready for that game. And then the last conference in the group is the SEC. So back on Thursday night, this game, the Egg Bowl between Ole Miss and Mississippi State, that used to be played on Thanksgiving. I think they moved it in the 2000s to Saturday, but they moved it back this year to Thursday night. I like it like that. It's tradition. Ole Miss does get the win to move to 6-6. That does have them bowl eligible, but they have self-imposed a bowl ban trying to get ahead of this NCAA thing, which should be coming down either this week or next, and we'll see what kind of penalties they take. But they did self-impose a bowl ban. Mississippi State did lose their quarterback to a gruesome injury this week, Nick Fitzgerald. A lot of people say that's why Ole Miss won the other night, and it very possible could have been. But at the same time, if you watch the beginning of that game, Ole Miss came ready to play. They came down, first drive, took it down the field, scored a touchdown. So I think they would have had a pretty good shot at getting that victory either way. But Mississippi State losing their quarterback was a big deal for them. Ole Miss did let Mississippi State score 22 in the fourth quarter and try to come back and win that game. And luckily, Ole Miss got an onside kick and got the 31-28 victory. Friday, Missouri takes care of business over Arkansas, moves to 7-5. They won the game 48-45. So, and Brett Bielema said that coming off the field is when he was told he was not going to be back next year. So Arkansas loses the game, falls to 4-8, fires their head coach. It's going to be interesting to see who takes that job. It's a good job. A lot of rumors coming around Gus Malzahn. And honestly, and I know this is going to sound probably like a homer, Alabama homer, but I wouldn't blame him for leaving just because it seems like every year Gus Malzahn is on the hot seat from his own fans, and it wouldn't shock me for him to go back to his home state and leave them hanging. I don't know how it's going to go down, but we'll see in the next couple weeks. Auburn, Alabama yesterday, we mentioned earlier in the video, but Auburn gets the victory at home last night, 26-14, beating the Tide, the number one team in the country. And we'll go to the SEC championship game because of that win to play Georgia. We talked about Clemson, and South Carolina. We talked about Georgia, Georgia Tech. We've talked about Florida, Florida State, and Louisville, Kentucky. So Texas A&M and LSU. LSU gets a victory at home, 45-21. Moves them to 9-3. I thought they would go 8-4 this year, so they've actually exceeded my expectations. And Coach O's got them going down there, 6-2 in the SEC. A&M falls to 7-5, and it'll be interesting to see what happens to someone today. I haven't seen any report yet, but I know before the season started, their AD said 8 wins were not enough. So at 7-5, it doesn't sound like he's going to be there. And then Tennessee and Vanderbilt, both those teams came in with 0 SEC wins this year. So Vanderbilt gets their first win in the SEC, 42-24 over in-state rival Tennessee. And Vanderbilt has won the last 2 years. If you go back in history, you're not going to see a lot of Vanderbilt wins. And if I remember right, growing up, Tennessee dominated Vanderbilt every year. So for them to lose 2 in a row to Vandy is a big deal for that school. It really shows how the two schools have kind of changed over the years, and Nashville has got a little better while Knoxville's falling apart. So we'll see who Tennessee picks up as a head coach and moves on from there. The SEC does have 9 teams bowl eligible. As I mentioned earlier, Ole Miss will not be going to a bowl because of the school actually put themselves on a bowl ban. They have 10 teams eligible. 9 will go play for a bowl game, with Georgia and Auburn playing for the SEC championship game this Saturday in Atlanta. So that should be a good game. It should be a rematch. I think Gus had some pretty stout words for after they beat Georgia a few weeks ago, and that will give them motivation to Georgia. Plus, beating a team twice is pretty tough. But obviously right now, Auburn looks like the better team, so we'll see what happens. And as I talked about in the first video, I do want to go over my top 4. So my top 4 as of this morning, Sunday morning, I have number 1, Clemson. Now to me, the top 2 was very close. It really could go either way. But in my opinion, Clemson is playing kind of leveled off. They know their strengths, and they're not really showing a lot. But Clemson number 1, Oklahoma number 2. Oklahoma did have that big win yesterday at home, but like I said, I think Clemson just edges them just a little bit. Auburn at number 3. I think Auburn has proved, even with 2 losses, that they are a top 4 team. They can have 3 losses right now, and in the way they're playing, to me, they would be pretty hard to say that they're not a top 4 team. And then number 4, Wisconsin. So Wisconsin is undefeated. There's really no reason why you can keep them out of at least the top 5. So I have them in at number 4. We'll see what they do against Ohio State. I think that if they get a win against Ohio State, they're solid. So it really does back it up. If they lose, it's one of those things where, it's how bad did they lose, that sort of thing. Number 5 is number 6. Really close would be Alabama and Georgia. I think that if Georgia gets a win against Auburn this week, obviously they're going to the playoffs. If Alabama just sits there, a lot of things have to happen, but they do have a chance to get back in. I'm not sure if Alabama is a top 4 team, to be honest. I don't feel like they're really as good as their record shows. They're lying a lot on Jalen, and they're not getting a lot of return right now just because there's too much talent on that team to be looking for one player to run it. As I talked about earlier in the video, Alabama is a team that is loaded with talent. They should not have that problem. And Auburn really come out with a better game plan yesterday and took care of business. So, as you can see, everybody holds their own destiny in their hand. If they win their conference championship, they take care of business, they're in. As far as I see, like I said, my top 4 is Clemson, Oklahoma, Auburn, and Wisconsin. So I really appreciate you guys tuning in this week for the live show, and please leave comments. Let me know what you think, and check out this week. I'll have a video up for the conference championship games, previewing a few of those, and good luck with everything you do this week. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Thanks.